Welcome to the Tech Talks Daily Podcast, where you can learn and be inspired by real-world examples of how technology is transforming businesses and reshaping industries in a language everyone can understand. Here is your host, Neil C. Hughes.
Welcome back to the Tech Talks Daily Podcast. Now, as many of you know, I am passionate about busting myths, perceptions and stereotypes on this daily tech podcast. And today I'm going to be talking to Victor from Dentons on the podcast. Now, regular listeners will know that I've had other people from Dentons on the show. I think the company's been on 4 or 5 times over the last 5 years, I think. But what I love about their work is I think that most people just see Dentons as the biggest law firm in the world. But what they don't see or might not necessarily know about is that they're also leading the way forward in thought leadership, technological change, acceleration, disruption, all to help businesses and startups think differently and thrive as our world continues to evolve. So Victor is today's guest, and he's the head of Dentons Global Venture Technology practice, and he's currently advising clients to focus on things like automation, artificial intelligence and robotics. So we have lots to get through together today. So buckle up and hold on tight so I can beam your ears all the way to New York, where Victor is waiting to speak with us right now. So a massive warm welcome to the show, Victor. Can you just remind the listeners with a little about who you are and what you do?
Thank you, Neil. This is Victor Boyajian. I'm the global head of the emerging growth company practice for Dentons, a global law firm, actually the largest law firm in the world, with a broad reach in the key tech centers around the world. And again, excited to be here with you.
It's so great to get you on the podcast as well, because you have been a frequent speaker on the national stage and have spoken at industry conferences in a variety of locales, such as Silicon Valley, the New York Met area, and Boston and London, and that list goes on and on. But the concept of networking and speaking at a tech conference, it almost feels like another lifetime away. So I'm curious, how have you personally dealt with adopting to this now very different world?
First of all, as a base foundational point, I enjoy my perch, not only representing real clients, real time, but spending time with them, again, globally, and as well as with my team. And so, again, some of my last meetings before I was grounded, literally, I was in Madrid, Berlin, London, again, and part of the benefit of that is, again, having the opportunity to spend time with the local community, and that means core constituencies like the local venture community, the local emerging growth community, my clients who are in Berlin, for example, who invest dollars in emerging growth companies, and sort of helping connect the dots to the larger players. So how does a round company stick with Berlin, raise its next round of capital? Does it go to London? Does it go to New York? Does it go to Silicon Valley? Does it stay within region, for example? Those are the kind of points that I love talking about and love thinking about, frankly, as a practicing attorney, actually. To your specific question, what has happened and how does it impacted me? Well, for the first time in 25 years, I've been grounded, literally, and I don't do my normal. I split my time between San Francisco Bay Area and New York when I'm not, quote unquote, traveling, and I can't even do that. So now I'm grounded in the New York area, but you do stay connected through all the usual apps with your client bases, making sure you understand their needs, but also what's going on in their particular markets. So, for example, we were just on a call, and it was very interesting engaging the team from Edinburgh and hearing what the folks in Edinburgh are saying to the folks in Sao Paulo, and the folks in Sao Paulo, what they're saying to the team in San Diego and Sydney, for example, and understanding it takes a little more effort, but to understand what's going on in the market, it certainly is achievable.
And it's those insights that you have through communicating and collaborating with the startup community all over the world that I'm really interested in drilling down on, because as we all know, it is an incredibly challenging time for everyone. And in particular, startups, their founders, their teams, and VCs too. So for what you're seeing right now and those conversations that you're having all over the world, where do you think VC investors should look in this post-COVID-19 world?
Again, I start with a basic foundational point. It is critically important for emerging growth company CEOs to make sure they are adapting to this environment, right? Even during the pre-corona, pre-COVID environment, the most successful deals, meaning not only when they were immediately funded, but thereafter, were when the VC was backing a CEO and management team that could adapt to change. That's what being an entrepreneur is all about. Frankly, while this is deeper, more global, and more existentially threatening, I'll say, VCs are looking for the way CEOs are reacting to those changes and how they're executing against plan, how they're changing their plans, how they're going after markets. I mean, we have companies, for example, that have multiple as customers. They have multiple targets that they go after in terms of verticals. And obviously, you need to if one of your key verticals is hospitality and travel, well, you may actually need to make sure you're pivoting away from that for the moment as a CEO. And pivoting to what? Well, maybe it's digital health, maybe it's AI, data, robotics. Again, it's critical. And even if that were not part of your plan, and your plan started in the travel and hospitality sector or sectors, depending how defined, you may need to, again, have the wherewithal to pivot. Not only having the thinking process and the strategic process and the plan to do that, but to make sure that you convince your current investors to be able to do that. Because again, it's not always about just being able to get your A round dollars. It's about getting your current board, which is basically your investors, your pre-existing investors, to support your pivot. And that's critical. And that's making sure that you are educating them along the way.
And something I'm seeing, especially around consumers, is almost the birth of the low-touch economy, where people don't want to be touching touchscreens that don't belong to them for obvious reasons. And we're also seeing advances in technology, bringing things like thermal scanning into the norm in shopping malls, etc., and even the rise of QR codes. I mean, they've been promising to solve problems for many, many years now, even decades, but this seems to be more of a use for them now because people would sooner scan than touch something. Then we've got augmented reality for the same reasons. But in other areas of tech, do you think automation and artificial intelligence is going to increasingly play a huge role in maintaining health and safety standards too?
Neil, I think it's a great point. I think that, again, as we all know, I don't want to talk about cliches or talk in cliches, but adversity brings opportunity. And again, those who are best positioned to take advantage of it will actually do quite well. And I think the areas you highlighted are critically important areas to be thinking about. Again, if you're in that area to start, then you may be pivoting within that realm in terms of application within a particular market or new market. Again, if you're not quite in the area, or you're in the healthcare area generally, then you may look at this as a new opportunity to direct your dollars, assuming, by the way, that you have the team that's able to do that. So I don't want to minimize how difficult a pivot can be, because teams may not be able to, your existing team may not be the right team to help you execute against a plan if you were to pivot. And VCs are clearly, whether they're new money or existing money, and again, those that are representing existing money are, of course, on your board, are going to be thinking hard about that to see whether or not this team is the right team. And I'm talking about the wider team, not just the leadership team, is a team that can execute against a new plan.
And another thing I suppose we should highlight here is that many startups would have initially set out to solve problems that might have actually ceased to be as important to meet consumers' needs, because they've all evolved now to something completely different here in 2020 and beyond. So presumably a lot of companies and startups have got to pivot to survive, haven't they?
Again, I think that is exactly right. And it's both the strategic pivot, it's making sure, as you always are doing pre-COVID as well, making sure the market is initially responsive to your product offering. Secondly, that you are continuing to respond to the market as to your product offering. And in terms of improvements, enhancements, that's always been the case. And that's where our most successful companies are. It's not just about coming up with an idea and selling it, and then because the market's not responding, thinking the market is just not getting it. No, maybe they do get it and they don't want your product. And you don't want to be a quote unquote nice to have, because no one finds budget for nice to haves, quote unquote nice to haves. In this environment, people are finding budget and are purchasing for essential products and services, and you need to make sure that you're aligned in that way of thinking in terms of your buyer, whether the buyer is an IT purchaser, whether it's the CFO, it's somebody else in the chain. You need to make sure they view you as essential.
And speaking of essential services, do you think we will see more tech focused on things like robotic temperature screening at building entrances and within offices? Because something needs to happen to get people back into the workplace. I know it probably won't be everyone going back into the office in the way they used to, but there's still going to be that hybrid approach, and you're going to need to enter offices for things like collaboration, aren't you?
I think the answer is yes. And look, we have the good fortune of not only being in key markets abroad that I mentioned earlier, but also not only just being on the coast, meaning Silicon Valley and the Northeast here in New York, but also in the middle of the country. So I see this in talking to my teams in Pittsburgh, which is a center of excellence here in the U.S., working with CMU, Carnegie Mellon University, in the area of robotics. Autonomous driving, et cetera. We have done deals in and work with, for example, Drive Capital, which is in Columbus. They have positioned themselves over time as a key investor in the robotics area. I think that any of these investors and these locales are going to spawn technologies in the areas you're talking about. It makes sense. And it goes beyond, by the way, some of the, things that relate to, thermal testing and that kind of thing, and healthcare. I think you have to think about whether or not you, as a plant manager, for example, because a lot of my tech companies have manufacturing components. How do you deal with that where your teams do not have the benefit of remote working? See, right now, a lot of people are thinking about, as you well know, well, how do I get my office staff able to work remote? And oftentimes pre-corona has been in some ways working remote. How do you get them back into the office building, whether it's a 1-story, 5-story, or goodness, a 50-story? But again, that's all on the services side, essentially. The question is, again, on the manufacturing side, is there going to be an acceleration on the introduction of robotics to hardcore plant manufacturing, and some of the stuff that still hasn't resonated with robotics yet, because again, people haven't really figured out a way to introduce robotics into non-tech manufacturing. So again, I think there's a whole opportunity, arena for opportunity down the road, as you suggested at the outset of this podcast.
And I'm glad you mentioned robotics there, because I'm curious. Are you seeing any trends around things like automated cleaning systems? Is there anything that you're witnessing around that, or anything that you think will happen around that area?
Sure. I mean, as you walk through, various retail locations. You can see, the cleansing of facilities, more frequently, real time. You've got the human element going on. You've got the robotics component as well. I think that's going to accelerate. Again, I think people have to just make sure what they're doing is twofold. One, it's not just kind of nice to have, and gosh, you see some robotic-like entities spritzing along the way, whether it's in an office environment or in a retail environment. Is it effective? And people have to have confidence, which is the second component, that whatever one is doing, it is in fact achieving what it's set out to do. So again, I think there needs to be real matrix around some of these new technologies to drive home the point that, again, robotics can in fact achieve, from a healthcare perspective and preventative health perspective, a lot of the issues, again, you're alluding to.
And you also mentioned now, and I think it's so true, about having that confidence and that it's effective in anything that we do. And we've seen so many different areas of technology all splintering off at the moment. For example, there's a lot of reports of that we're going to eventually see driverless vehicles that will dominate the landscape and help people avoid contact with drivers or delivery workers, etc. But how far are we away from that realistically? And again, I suppose it comes back to that confidence, and how effective would it actually be?
Look, the whole model's changing, right? So even if we get our hands around COVID, and whether it's through vaccine, therapeutics, whatever, I think the way of thinking will have permanently altered in terms of what, on the consumer side, consumer expectations are, employee management expectations are, healthcare industry expectations are, government expectations. So there is going to be a wholesale change in the way people think about healthcare and wellness overall, and safety. And I think that what you're going to see a lot of in this environment today, it's sort of like the Petri dish, where there's going to be a lot of experimentation going on. What's, again, core essential, what works in the core essential, what's nice to have, what's nice to have, but it's not really compelling, is going to fall by the wayside. Yes, there will be some investment dollars going to some of those nice to haves, but at the end of the day, a lot of the big corporate strategics, including healthcare systems, are going to need to prioritize their spend and invest in, again, the essential offerings that have proven track records. And so that's where I think it's critical to track where you're seeing progress made in the industry, not just where the venture firms are investing, because venture firms always think big. They like to think big and invest in a lot of different things. But at the end of the day, that gets winnowed down pretty fast in terms of what's really the most successful vehicle for investment, meaning what are the most successful ideas that are getting market traction today, which could change, by the way, on a pretty rapid basis, pushing out even just a year or two.
And for any business leaders that could be listening to this podcast today, trying to make sense of this new way of thinking and the new evolving customer needs, are you seeing a shift towards adding value through things like strategic thinking, data-driven decisions, and automation, or is it something else? What are you seeing there?
Well, look, I think that at the end of the day, again, I think that business leaders need to make sure, and whether, by the way, they're the CEO of a startup or a CEO of a major, Fortune 500 company and everything in between, of course, you need to do what you normally would do, but with particular focus, which is listen to the markets, understand where the markets are going, engage the markets. You need to engage the markets. It's harder if you're a B2C play, because trying to engage the markets on the consumer side has always been more difficult than if you're a B2B play, where you're talking to major industry leaders. Your company, your customers are larger customers and companies. So again, you do have to, though, find a way to engage markets and figure out what their expectations are, what their needs are, where they're willing to spend dollars. And again, dollars are limited, right? We are in a global recession, but there is spend still. And so again, people are just being really super uber smart about where they're spending dollars. You just have to be able to tap into those veins, if you will, of resources.
And of course, the world does feel like a crazy place at the moment. There's just so much going on. It can be hard to make sense of everything. But to end on a positive note, what makes you hopeful or even excited about the future and the road ahead?
Well, look, technology is about innovation. I've been doing this 25 plus years, and I have been through 4 or 5 downturns. No one has been through a global pandemic of this sort. But if you look through all periods of adversity that we've faced, the good news about our sector, and my sector is TMT, which is technology, media, telecom, of course, and healthcare, life sciences. Those are the natural arenas for innovation. And I have consistently seen that through adversity and even good times, innovation has led the way in terms of new solutions for consumers and the world writ large. Not to sound overly lofty, but that is actually true. We have so many of our clients, for example, in the life sciences arena, working hard to find the next cure for the COVID or a vaccine for COVID or other illnesses, if you will. So again, I'm not afraid. Yes, you have to get through the initial shock, but again, this sort of environment breeds innovation. And as you pointed out, it may not be what we envisioned last year in terms of where the new hot thing might be, but so what? That's not what this world is. The world is constantly changing. It's just more pronounced right now.
Love that. And for anyone listening that would like to continue to follow you, check out the great work that you're doing, or even contact your team if they've got any questions after listening to our conversation today. What's the best way of doing that?
Well, again, I would just go to our website. I would go to Dentons VentureBeyond and go to our entire team. It's our microsite where we try to engage the marketplace with not only our own thought leadership, but the thought leadership of other thought leaders on a worldwide basis. Again, our thinking is not generated from one particular region. It's global in breadth. And so you can learn from what our colleagues in Milan and Toronto and Singapore are doing and bring that to bear to your operations and thinking, if you will, here stateside.
I cannot thank you enough for coming on here, because I think for many people listening, yes, they will know that Dentons is the world's biggest law firm. But what I love about what you're doing here is, especially through Dentons Ventures Beyond, is that innovation is leading the way to new solutions. And you're almost leading businesses through this period of uncertainty as well, and showing them the way and looking at how technology is evolving. And I think it's just priceless work that you're doing here. So a big thank you for coming on and taking the opportunity to speak with me, and also shouting about this work that you're doing that possibly some people listening may not have encountered until listening to our conversation today. So thank you.
Thank you, Neil. Appreciate the opportunity. Good luck. Stay safe. Be well.
Like I said at the beginning of this podcast, Dentons to me are much more than just the world's biggest law firm. And I love how they shattered the myth today of law firms being slow to adapt to technological change, as we talked about things like robotic temperature screening at building entrances and offices, and automated cleaning systems in nursing homes and assisted living facilities, not to mention driverless vehicles. But most of all, I just love chatting about how from Berlin to Utah, whether your aim is an IPO or an M&A transaction, or even to transform your industry, the teams at Dentons seem to be gathering their insights and sharing thought leadership to help everyone drive their success. And as Victor said there, innovation will lead the way forward with new solutions. And that's why I love how Dentons seem to have just grasped that and playing their part in showing the light at the end of the tunnel and showing opportunities where others might just see challenges. And right now, we all need that kind of leadership. But enough of me getting all excited as usual. Whatever industry you're in, if you want to bust myths, perceptions, or just show how you or your company are leading the way forward with technology or changing how you're thinking and looking at new solutions, embracing innovation, whatever it is, I want you to come on here and share your passion, your enthusiasm, and your insights and expertise. Or if you just want to ask me a question, you can do that as well. So please email me, techblogwriter@outlook.com. My website is techblogwriter.co.uk, where you'll find 1,300 episodes of this podcast. Remember, I also host a Citrix podcast called Tech Fusion and Switched On Thinking with Netgear too. But I'm very keen to get your thoughts and insights, and maybe we can all lead the way forward together. So keep those messages coming in, and I'll return again tomorrow with another guest. So a big thank you for listening, and until next time, don't be a stranger.
Thank you for listening to the Tech Talks Daily Podcast with Neil C. Hughes. Remember, technology works best when it brings people together.